Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. If you would grab your Bibles, we're going to get into Exodus chapter 3 today. We're in a series called Blind Spots. We've been looking at and learning from some Old Testament characters. Last week we talked about David. We've talked about Samson, Jonah, Elijah. We've been walking through some of these Old Testament characters and really taking, I guess, a true hard look at some areas in their lives that everyone else could see, but they couldn't see. They were kind of like in their blind spot. They couldn't see what was happening. Like they weren't looking over their shoulder. They weren't seeing the areas that were sneaking up on them, and they caused some crashes and wreaked some havoc in their lives. And so today I want to take a look at a guy that most of us have heard of, even if you're like new to Christianity. It's a guy named Moses. And I think it's important for us to see this. In Exodus chapter 33, verse 11, it says this: the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. So he was known as a friend of God. The good news for you and I is that doesn't mean that he was a perfect man by any stretch of the imagination. And today we're going to look at Moses' blind spot of insecurity. And it was sneaking up on him from the beginning and moving forward. And as we talk about insecurity, this is something that we all deal with. We all have insecurity that we are struggling with, and sometimes it's under our feet, and sometimes it's nipping at our heels, and sometimes we don't see it, and we're operating out of it, and we don't realize it. But insecurity is the thing that holds us back, and a lot of times we don't even know what we missed because insecurity never allowed us to take a risk and to do something that we never thought we could, and so it just kind of never got started, so we don't even know kind of the cost of insecurity in our own life. And so I'm convinced that Satan loves it when you are insecure. Yeah. If I were your enemy, I would probably try to do my best to try to convince you to give up on something before you even tried it, to give better odds that you would never do it in the first place. And if we look at this, the enemy of our souls, Satan loves to abort ideas before they ever become actions. And you see this maybe have played out in your own life, in your past, in your present, like these fears and insecurities holding you back from ever taking a risk and ever launching out to do the thing that you feel like God has put in your heart to do. And so you never try. And so if you turn with me to Exodus chapter 3, that's kind of where we're going to be kind of hunkered down in today. And as you turn there, I just want to give you a little bit of brief biography of Moses in case you've never heard of him before or you need a refresher. Moses was born Hebrew about 1500 BC. That's a long time ago, older than most of us in here. He was born as a Hebrew, a Jew, and at that time, 1500 BC, all of the Hebrew people were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. And not only were they slaves, sometimes people say like, oh, they helped build the temples and all these different things, the pyramids and stuff, but they were growing in number and getting bigger and bigger and bigger as slaves in Egypt. And this was concerning to Pharaoh because, it's nice to have more slaves, but once the slave population gets too big, then an uprising could be a real deal. And so Pharaoh makes a decision and makes a law that no more Hebrew children are allowed, male Hebrew children are allowed to be able to be born and then survive. It's a harsh law. And so Moses' mother has Moses, she gives birth, and she tries to save his life by putting him in a basket and sending him downriver. And twist of all twists, he's found, he is saved, he is raised in the palace, in Pharaoh's palace, by Pharaoh's daughter. Like, she finds the baby, takes the baby, saves the baby, raises the baby as her own in Pharaoh's house. So you'd kind of think like, man, he's kind of privileged. Like, this Hebrew kid got like a really awesome break. The problem is that he always knows that he's not, like, he's in the palace, but he's not of the palace. Like, he always knows that he's not really one of them, and that all of these slaves, all of these people that are being beaten and enslaved and abused are his people. And so he's in the palace looking outside of the palace and watching his people being abused and misused, and it gnaws at him his whole life. And he has something on the inside of him, as maybe you can understand, like something that's like gnawing at him. Like, I want to set my people free. I want to be a change agent. I can't stand watching my people being treated the way that they are. And so he takes it into his own hands in Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. I'll just read it for you. It says, one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So that happened. Moses, known as the meekest man on earth, Moses, the friend of God, in this moment decides, I know what to do. I'm going to kill this guy and then hide the body in the sand. Like, we talked last week that, like, the story of David and Bathsheba could have been like on the Oxygen channel. Like it could have, one of those true crimes. This one would be like the world's dumbest criminals. Like, what in the, like, this didn't seem like a very good plan. I'm just going to say that. Like, it certainly doesn't seem like he had really thought this thing through. And I don't know about you, but there have been times and seasons in my own life where like a God-given passion maybe took too long, and so I decided to just take it up into my own hands. I don't know if you've ever been there before, where you're like, you get impatient with God because you're like, I know this is in your heart, Lord. I know that you want to do this, but you're just taking way too long, and I've been waiting, and I've given you more than enough time to do this, and so I'm just going to now do it to help you out. And if you've done this, then you probably understand exactly what I'm talking about, that many times, like, our impatience with God's plan will actually push us to make our own plans that can actually hindering God's plan. And you're like, you should have just take your hands off it, but you got your hands onto it, and you tried to make this thing happen, and then you realize, like, I actually got in the way, and this is kind of what happens with Moses. He's like, whoa, I didn't really plan this thing out. Like, I was reacting, and I saw this, and so he kills a guy and hides him in the sand. Spoiler alert, Moses gets found out. Pharaoh is not happy with him. Pharaoh tries to kill him. Moses goes on the run. And so he's just kind of in this instance of like rage and passion, and like even this thing of like this innate desire to like set his people free. He gives up everything, his position, his influence, his power, his bedroom in Pharaoh's palace, his dream of being able to free the Hebrew people. He gives it all up, and he goes and runs away for his life because Pharaoh's coming after him to kill him, and he goes into hiding, and he just kind of puts his head down. Maybe you're in that place right now too, where you did the thing you tried to do and it didn't work, and so you put your head down, and so you just kind of like you're so far from your passion of helping God's people, I'm just going to put my head down because it didn't work out, and I tried to do this and it just wasn't the right time, and I'm not the right person. And so we pick it up in Exodus chapter 3. His insecurity. Moses is herding sheep on a mountain. Like I said, he's no longer in the palace. He's out far away from the kingdom. He is just, he's herding sheep. And Exodus 3 verse 2 says this: there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. And so Moses thought, I'll go over to see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. So Moses turns away from his flock of sheep. He's up on the mountainside making sure that they're all taken care of and they're not running off and doing all these things. And he turns away from his flock of sheep and he turns his attention towards this spiritual weirdness that's happening. Like it's this weird bush on fire, but not burning, but is on fire, but isn't. Like it's this weird spiritual oddity that's happening. And I think it's important for us to see this, that the bush isn't the distraction. You think like, oh, that's a distracting thing. No, I think actually the bush is what he should be paying attention to. The distraction was the work that he was currently doing. And so he turns aside, he turns from the thing that was preoccupying him, and he turns toward the Lord. He turns toward this spiritual experience thing that's happening. And then in verse 4 it says, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. I don't know what it sounded like, but it was I'm sure it was cooler than that, but it was, God spoke out of a bush that was burning but not burning, but like this was not a distraction. This actually was what God was doing. And so he turns aside from all of his work and all of the things and the busyness of life and he turns toward what it is that God's doing in his midst. And I think it's important just to make this distinction that like it's usually when we choose to turn away from what we're occupied with and make ourselves available that's when we hear God call. It's not when we're staying busy and we're doing this and hitting sheep and keeping them all together and taking all the stuff. It's when we choose to, what is God doing? We make ourselves available. We tune not only our eyes but our ears and our heart towards this spiritual experience. God starts speaking to him and calls his name. And Moses says to him in verse 4, here I am. Here I am. It's like this weird answer. Moses, Moses, here I am. Can I just say this? The first step of obedience oftentimes is simply acknowledging that God is calling you. That's really the first step, just acknowledging like, oh, okay, here I am. And I would say this, there may be some people in here today that are like, you don't really know where your faith is. You're kind of here, but you're kind of not. Like, I like this church. I like maybe this experience. Maybe you're invited today and you're kind of just like, I don't really know where I stand on faith right now. But if you're really honest, like during worship, you're just like, I don't know, there was something different. Like I felt this warmth and I don't even know what was going on, but I felt what I would say is the presence of God. Like, and I don't quite know what to do with that. I don't really have a box to put that in. Can I just tell you that your first step is to just acknowledge it? And just say like, okay, I don't know what to do with this. I don't really have a box to put this in. That was kind of weird. I don't know why I started crying during worship. Like that was odd, but here I am. Here I am. Like I'm open. I'm turning aside to my life and all of the things that busy me, and I'm turning to just pay attention. And sometimes maybe your answer is just, I'm open. Here I am. I hear you, I sense you. And he goes on in verse 7. The Lord speaks to him and says, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, all the ites. I want them to go into a new land that is their own. And then in verse 10, the Lord says to Moses out of this burning bush, so now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. To which what we can gather, Moses is like, excuse me? Me? Go? Where? Like now? Like what? Like you're talking to me. Like you just said that like had come down to rescue them. I don't know what that has to do with me. Like, go ahead, do the thing that you came down here to do. I just don't know why you're talking to me. I don't know why you think that I'm the one that should be doing this. And it's at this point that we start to see the beginning of Moses' insecurities rise up. And they rise up in the form of questions because that's kind of how we begin. So many times we can locate the blind spot of insecurities by the questions that we ask. We see it in verse 11, Moses' response. Moses says to God, here it is, who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Like the first question of insecurity Moses asks is, who am I? Which is the same question that all of us are crushed with. As we grow up, as we start to mature, it's this question that we're all wondering, who am I? It's a question of identity. And it's the reason why, there are so many personality profile assessments out there now. You got like the DISC profile, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, StrengthsFinder, all like trying to answer the question that we're all seeking the answer to, which is, who am I? Who am I? And what's interesting is that insecurity is so powerful that you can literally be talking face to face with God and still be talking yourself out of that which he's telling you. He's literally talking to a talking bush, and the Lord's speaking to him, and he's like, yeah, but who am I? That's how powerful insecurity can be in someone's life. And what we know to be true is that sometimes our thoughts are more caught than taught. Sometimes it's the thoughts that people throw at us that we catch that stick with us the most. If you think about it, I'm sure people have like filled your bucket and said all kinds of nice things about you and like all kinds of like affirmations and things that are just like, oh man, it just makes me feel so good. But it's usually the harsh words and the criticism and the hateful speech that was spoken over you that is actually the things that like keep you up at night and rattle around in that brain of yours. It's those thoughts that you caught that sometimes you begin to believe about yourself because they were said by someone that you know or they know you. And I think for Moses, when he says like, who am I? It's actually an echo of a question that his own people asked him years before. After he tried to take things into his own hands, remember he killed the Egyptian, hit him in the sand. Well, right after that, the very next day, he goes out and he sees two Hebrew people fighting, and he's like, hey, he's trying to break it up. He's still in the place of like, hey, you guys got to get along. You guys, come on, we're brothers here. And he's trying to just take things into his own hands. And one of his own people, one Hebrew guy that he was trying to break up the fight with, says this to him in Exodus chapter 2, verse 14. The man says to him, who made you ruler and judge over us? In other words, who do you think you are? To which I think Moses was probably wondering, like, I don't really know. That's a good question. I don't know who I am. It's the question that I've been wrestling with for a long time now. Who am I? And many times, it's other people's doubts about us that begin to seep into our soul. Who do you think you are? I don't know. Who am I? Who made you ruler and judge? Who made you boss? I don't know. Who am I? Which leads us to our second question, Moses' second question in verse 12. Actually, before we get to that, let's just look at God's answer to Moses. Moses is like, who am I? Like, who am I that you're going to send me? And verse 12, Exodus chapter 3, God's response says, I will be with you. Like, I find it odd because God doesn't go on and on about Moses. About how he's like, oh, Moses, like you're wondering who you are? You're good enough. You're smart enough. Doggone it, people like you. Like you're a winner, Moses. I chose you because you're good and you're smart and you're good looking. That's why I chose you. Like, who am I? You're the apple of my eye. Like he doesn't go into any of that. What you'd think, in the moment of insecurity, God would stroke that ego just a bit. And God's like, I'll be with you. He doesn't tell Moses, like, I chose you because you're a 3 of the Enneagram, or you're a high D in the disc profile. We need some better leaders in the kingdom. That's why I chose you, because of your personality and you're so charismatic. That's why I chose you. Like the maddening thing about that we see all throughout the Bible is that God always seems to like to get his job done through the most unlikely people. So he doesn't always choose the cream of the crop. He chooses the bottom of the barrel, and he's like, hey, you go. Who am I? Don't worry. I'll be with you. See, God's response of, I'll be with you, is literally the non-answer that is truly the answer, isn't it? It's almost like God is saying to him, Moses, I love you, but like this really isn't about you. It's really about my plan. It's really about the Lord. And because insecurity always focuses and fixates on me, and God's like, it's not about you, it's about me. God's like, you asked, who am I? But you really need to be figuring out who I am. You're wondering about like, well, who am I? And I'm like, you need to be figuring out who it is that's with you. Because you only truly come to the awareness of who he is. That's when you begin to understand who you are. You start to understand who God is. All of a sudden now it begins to dictate and to inform who I am. I mean, part of this ever-changing identity crisis that we have in America right now is because we're trying to define who we are without understanding who he is. So we're like, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? I think I'm this. Who am I? Who am I? And God's saying like, I'm with you. Like I dictate. When you understand who I am, it dictates who you are. We sang that song like, I am who you say that I am. Why? Because it all began with him. He's the creator, the maker, the designer of all. He's saying, get a good firm grasp of who I am so that you can understand who you are. Like the antidote to insecurity is not getting more confidence in myself, it's getting confidence in the God who is with me. Like, God, I need you to go with me. I need you with me because I know I'm not enough. Because it's the God that is with you, and you already have everything that you need. It's always been his presence with us that enables us to do the things that he's given to us to do. And if you look at like other religions, you look at like non-Christian religions, like it's all about like it's based upon like you trying harder, doing better, achieving more, like disciplining yourself, working harder. But Christianity is all about that God is with us, and if he's not, then we're lost. You could try hard, you can try to be as holy as you can try to be, but if like God isn't with you, then like you're on a fast track to burnout. It doesn't work that way. Warren Wiersbe, there's a quote I just want to read to you. It says this: trying to do God's work in our own strength will either fail miserably or, more miserable, succeed. Let me say that one more time. Trying to do God's work in our own strength will either fail miserably or, even more miserable, succeed. Like, there is this reality. Yahweh is saying to Moses, I think he says that same thing to us, like, you can't do this. Like, who am I? You aren't good enough. You need Me. You need me. And God calls us to something, like we have to remember that that we're joining him in his plan, not the other way around. And when we try to do something and invite God into it and ask him to bless it and all those types of things, well, we call that burnout. We call that religion. But when it's something that is in the heart of God and he's asking us to join it, it is easy. He says, come to me all who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. There is a transfer of that like God's saying, like, if you just come alongside, walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it, I guarantee you it will be so much easier than you trying to get me to walk with you, work with you, watch how you do it, and ask me to bless the things that you want to do as you try to take something into your own hands. It's like, I'll be with you. You need me. And so we have this question of like, who am I? I think the best way to turn that around is to say, here I am. Here I am. Because when you're willing to do what you are unqualified to do, that's the very thing that qualifies you to do what only God can do through you. He can work with that. He can't work with somebody who's trying to like take this into their own hands and manipulate and construct and plan and do all this stuff on their own and be like, oh, by the way, God, could you bless this? What he can work with is when you say like, I'm unqualified. He's like, I know. I never called you because you were. Like, I actually just need you to just say, here I am. And I'll be with you. You stay in step with me, work with me, walk with me, watch how I do it. So it goes on to the second question. We see it in verse 13. Moses says to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is your name? Then what shall I tell them? The second question of insecurity is, okay, cool. Who am I? But like, God's like, I'll be with you. The second question is this, like, but who are you? Who are you? And God says to Moses in verse 14, he says, I love his answers are so crazy. He says like, God's answer is this. He's like, who are you? God says, I am who I am. What? He goes on, he says, this is what you are say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God goes on to tell Moses, he's like, I am the Lord, the one, the creator, like the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Like, I am that I am. I am who I am. I am the uncreated one. Like, and this reality that sometimes we need to just rest in the reality that his name carries with it the very power to fulfill his word. He's actually not calling us to here are your talking points, and this is what you need to say if they say this and all that. Like, this is how you take care of this situation or that situation. God's just saying, like, I will be with you. I am who I am. Lean into my name and watch me do what I do. The third question of insecurity, we see in Exodus chapter 4, verse 1. Moses is still struggling because he's struggling with insecurity. Moses answers, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? The third question of insecurity is this, what if they? So, who am I? Who are you? And what if they? Moses is like so worried about being rejected by the people of Israel, and he's like, well, what if they say this, or what if they do that, or what if they don't believe me, or what if this happens, or what if? Because this reality of like the fear of rejection has the power to paralyze you from ever moving forward. Literally, you can be stuck in this place like, okay, all right, I kind of am getting an understanding of who I am because I'm understanding who you are, but what about them? Like, what if they don't believe me? What if they don't listen to me? What if? And many times it's the fear of rejection from other people around us that causes us to be paralyzed and never step out and risk faith. But you don't understand. I've heard that they're saying about me and this and all of those different types of things. Like perseverating on what others think of you can cause you to never take the risk of faith. But they don't think that I'm qualified to do that. And God's like, no offense, I don't think you are either. That's why you need me. Yeah, but they said that I'm not. Okay. Whoop-de-ding. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've called you, I'm with you, now go. Yeah, but Moses says, what if they, and God responds in such this odd way. I love his response here again. Again, another just unexpected response. He doesn't start talking to Moses about these talking points. Well, if they don't believe you, then I want you to say this to them, and this is your talking point. You want me to write it down for you? No, and what if they do this, or what if they respond in this way? Well, then you can answer them this, and then ask them this question, and you can get to the heart of this. No, he doesn't do any of that. Literally, God responds in verse 2 with a weird question. He says to him, the Lord says to him, what's that in your hand? Huh? He's like, yeah, but what if they don't believe me? What if they say this? What if they talk about me behind my back? God's like, what's that in your hand? What? It's a staff. He's got a stick in his hand, a walking stick. And then God tells him, you can read this kind of on your own in Exodus chapter 4. He tells him, like, throw it on the ground, it becomes a snake. Whoa! Picks it back up for the tail, it becomes a stick again. This is the same stick that God, throughout the book of Exodus, uses to, like, part the Red Sea, have water come out of a rock. Crazy, crazy cool stuff out of a stick. Here's my point. God can literally use anything for his glory. Anything. And that is good news for you and I, because if God can use a stick to work a miracle, then he could probably use you. This wasn't a magic stick. Like, this was just a stick. No-named stick. Well, what were its qualifications? Dead? I don't know. I mean, like, it's a stick, and then God all of a sudden took a stick and then made it bud. So no, God can literally use anything for his glory, and he can certainly use you. So he's got all these questions like, who am I? Who are you? And what if they? And he's still struggling, because we do, even when God starts to answer questions for us and peel away those layers of insecurity, and now all of a sudden it moves from questions to excuses. Because that's what we do. Let's be honest, whenever we sense that God is telling us to do something, we usually think of all the reasons why we can't do it. Excuses. He says this, let me read it. Exodus chapter 4, verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, and he's so polite about it, I love it. He's like, pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you've spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. So Moses' first excuse is, I'm slow of speech and tongue. I no speak good. I'm afraid of public speaking. I never took the class. I no speak well, good things, not good. That's his reason. He's like, here's my excuse. You got to choose somebody else because I'm not your guy. I can't do the whole public speaking thing. And it seems to me that you want me to go and do a lot of public speaking. That's not my thing. What's interesting is this. And I've read a whole lot of commentators about that say that Moses most likely had maybe a speech impediment or a stutter or I don't know. I've heard a bunch of different things like that. I'd like to submit to you a thought that I wonder if that's true. I've always thought it too. I'm just submitting it to you. But I want to read something to you that Stephen had to say about Moses in Acts chapter 7, verse 22. Acts chapter 7, verse 22, Stephen says, Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. So was Stephen like bashing Moses for not being able to speak good? No. Actually, it says he was powerful, and I can't get around it, like in speech and action. In fact, Moses is the only one who talks about his inability to speak good. If you think about this, like, here's my point, like, insecurity will often create narratives that you believe about you that God doesn't speak over you. Let me say that again. Insecurity will often cause you to create narratives about you that God doesn't necessarily speak over you. Because this is God's response to Moses' apparent speech problem. Verse 11, the Lord said to him, great, his answers are epic. It's almost like, how do you come up with these? You must be God. He says, verse 11, the Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? And he goes on, but like, here's the point. Like, God's essentially saying, like, why is it that we're talking about your mouth? I just made a stick into a snake. Like, I gave you that mouth. I have sticks making miracles, and I make donkeys talk. We're talking about your mouth? Are you kidding me right now? Like, because insecurity will oftentimes magnify your weaknesses and minimize God's strength. He's like, well, but I don't speak well. And he's like, who gave you that mouth? Who gives human beings their mouth? They can handle this. Verse 12, God says to him, now, go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. It says, God will help you and he will teach you and he equips those he calls. Yeah, but I don't speak well. I don't do this whole thing. I think you got the wrong guy. God's like, no, your job is just to respond. Your job is just to go. I'll teach you. I'll fill your mouth. Who gave you that mouth anyway? I'll equip you because I've called you. In verse 13, Moses' second excuse comes out. He's very nice about his excuses. Moses says, pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else. I said, please. I don't know. I came up with I had a lot of questions. I told you I don't speak well. I'm just dropping the mic here. Just please, would you send someone else? In other words, like, I don't want to go. I'm not your guy. I don't speak good. I'm not qualified. I am not enough. And insecurity can often result in feelings of inferiority, like I'm not enough. I can't handle this. I can't do this. In inferiority, here's the interesting thing about it, can often present itself as humility. But it's not. It's false humility. It's actually just rebellion against God. Far too many people are comfortable with saying no to God. I'll just say that. Great idea, but how about no? I'm sending you. No. Could you please send somebody else? I don't want to go. I'm not going to do it. Please do that. Thank you. Be gone. Like, Moses' insecurity almost leads him to abandon his calling because he's refusing to go. And I just want to be very clear. God's not happy with him. He's not like, oh, okay, I didn't realize you got a lot of questions and you didn't speak good and you just don't want to go. That's fine. Next. I'll just keep burning this bush up over here. Maybe the next guy that comes by turns over. I'll have him do it. No, that's not how God reacts. In fact, look at what happens when Moses says no to God. Verse 14. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. How many know that's probably not a good thing? I wouldn't want it. So God was not simply okay with him just saying no. Like, how about no? No, I'm not going to do that. Like God's anger burns against Moses. And he continues in verse 14. It says, and God said, I bet he had to take a deep breath and said, what about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He doesn't shut up. Like he's already on his way to meet you, and he'll be glad to see you. Can I just tell you, I love how when, like God's anger, you think he could literally just make Moses a smudge spot in the earth, right? But God's anger results in creative problem solving and way making. His anger's burning up against Moses, and he's like, okay, fine. How about Aaron the Levite, your brother? We'll do him. We'll bring him in. We'll make a way. Because God's patience is so amazing with us. His grace, his mercy this is Old Testament. Like, how much more so in the new covenant that we live in do we get to live and watch and work within the grace and the mercy and the love that is outlandish? We certainly don't deserve. His patience with us is so amazing. And so God sends him a partner. When we're blinded to see God's strength, many times God will bring along someone to walk with us until we can see it. Let me say that again. When you are blinded to God's strength, many times God will bring someone alongside you until you can see it. So he sees Moses is like just coming up with excuses here. He's got all these questions, all that kind of stuff. So God says, fine, I'll send someone alongside you until you can see what it is that I want to do. See, sometimes God brings a co-pilot to ride alongside us, a friend, a mentor, a brother, a sister, whatever that looks like in your life. Sometimes he brings a helper into our lives, even when we think we don't need it. Even when we'd rather just walk away, even then we're just like, yeah, I'm done. I don't want to handle this. I don't want to walk in this. I don't want to do this. God says, no, I'm going to send someone alongside you because you're not seeing clearly right now, so he's going to help you see. Sometimes it comes in the form of your spouse. Maybe sitting in that passenger seat as you're driving, making sure you don't miss any of those blind spots. Right? Oh, you're going a little too fast, aren't you? You're too slow. What, did you see that? Did you see those brake lights? Stop here, turn there, turn your turn signal. What are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, they're making sure, and they're happy to point it out for you. All of your blind spots, they're like professionals at it. They see all the things that you don't see and even the things you do, but you didn't react too fast enough. But sometimes God puts people, even when we don't think we need them, alongside us. Amen? I'm going to leave you just 3 things how to overcome a blind spot of insecurity. And it has to do with kind of what Moses walked through. The first one is this. Remember that God is with you. If you're struggling with insecurity right now, maybe you're in this place of just like, I don't know, I'm talking myself out of everything. Like, remember that God is with you. Do you know how hard it is to be insecure when you're aware that the God of the universe is not only with you, but he dwells in you through the Holy Spirit? Get a revelation of that pure partnership between you and God that he invites every single one of us into as believers. So remember, firstly, that God is with you. The second thing is this. Shift your focus from yourself to him. Many times our blind spots often emerge because we're far too focused on ourselves and not focused on what it is that he's doing in our midst. Faith is not believing in your own ability. It's believing in God's sufficiency. Look up, not down. Look out, not always in. Like, focus on what it is that God's doing in your midst rather than being fixated on yourself. And the third one is this. Trust that God uses your weakness for his glory. You're like, but I mean, who am I? And Who are you? But what if they? Like, yeah, but I don't speak well. You shouldn't choose me. Could you just please send somebody else? They're far more qualified. This is what Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. But he said to me, the Lord said to him, my grace is sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Like, insecurities are often the very places where God shines the brightest in and through us. God doesn't need you to be perfect, he just needs you to be willing. So in the middle of this, like, well, who am I? Like, who are you? Like, what if they? And I don't speak well. And all of a sudden turns into the only thing that he needs is this. Here I am, send me. We sang about it today. Here I am, Lord. Send me. Send me. Why don't you stand with me? The good news is this. Moses, years later, finally gets it. It all comes to clarity. Exodus chapter 33. This is years later. This is like so much has happened. The Israelites have been freed from slavery. The Red Sea has split. God is providing manna from heaven and like splitting rock and waters pouring out. God is now telling Moses, I want you to lead my people. And I love Moses' response now. Exodus 33:15. He says, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. It's no longer like, well, like, who am I? I don't speak well. I mean, who are you going to send with me? Like, can you tell me more about who you? No, like all of those things have been settled. And he understands the most important thing. He's like, if you don't go with me, I'm not going. If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up. And then he says, just a few verses later, Moses says to the Lord, now, show me your glory. Show me your glory. He finally gets it, that it was never about him. It was never about his doubts or his insecurities or his apparent speech impediment or his excuses or how incapable or capable he felt to fulfill God's plan. It was never about him. It was always about God's plan all along. God's plan, God's heart to free God's people. May we be a people who realize that the only thing we can really offer God is, here I am. Here I am. If your presence doesn't go with me, though, I'm staying here. I need you. Now show me your glory. Show me what it is that you want to do. And maybe you're here, we're going to end with a song, that fear is not my future, that song we've been singing. And maybe you're here today and you just like, you know that God has been just calling. He's placing things in front of you and you've got questions and you've got excuses, you've got all kinds of reasons why you're not wanting to risk faith. But maybe today, I just want to encourage you, if you know that God's wanting you to turn aside and to look towards what it is that he is calling you to. Maybe you take this as a moment, as a time, as just to turn aside from where you're at right now and to say, God, I'm going to make this holy ground because I'm hearing you today. Here I am. I recognize your call today. Maybe you're here today and like I said earlier, like you don't really know where your faith is right now. You're kind of like, I don't know. I was here, and even as you've been speaking, I feel like you were literally reading my mail, even though I know you don't know me, but during worship, I found myself crying, and I'm a guy, and that's not cool, so I was trying to wipe it away, but I just know that there's something greater than just a TED Talk that's happening in a room full of people, that there's the very presence of God that is wanting to get my attention. Can I just encourage you to just say, here I am. I don't know what that means, and I don't have a box to put this in, but I'm open. It's scary as heck. I just say it. I'm open to you, Lord. And if that's where you're at, maybe you just take an opportunity maybe you come down and just say, during this time I'm not allowing my fears, my questions, my doubts, my insecurities, my excuses to hold me back any longer. They're not going to dictate my present or my future anymore. And so, Lord, here I am. So, Lord, as we sing this song, I pray that you would just begin to move on the hearts of your people today. Whatever that looks like, God, I pray that we would respond, that we would just stop saying no to you. As you tear away all of our excuses, Lord, I pray that you would have your way in us and through us so that you can set us free, and that we are set free to set others free. Have your way in us in Jesus' name. Amen. As we sing, feel free to make your way up.